Eric Clapton said. "Show me real blues." Jimi Hendrix smiled, quietly picked up his guitar, and played one note. After that note, no one in the room could speak. London. Winter 1967. A small rehearsal space above a pub in Soho, bare walls. Cold air seeping through the window cracks. The kind of room where musicians went to escape the noise of becoming famous. 6 people. Maybe 7. No one remembers exactly. What they remember is the silence that followed. Eric Clapton had arrived first. He was sitting on a wooden chair, his guitar across his lap, talking to 2 session musicians about chord progressions. Clapton was 22 years old and already being called God by fans who spray-painted it on London walls. He'd just left the Yardbirds. He was forming cream. He was the standard by which every British guitarist measured himself. He played blues the way it was meant to be played, traditional, respectful, technically flawless. He'd studied the masters, Robert Johnson, B.B. King, Muddy Waters. He knew the rules. He followed them religiously. And in following them perfectly, he'd become untouchable. Someone mentioned that Jimi Hendrix was in town. "The American," one of the session players said. "The one everyone's talking about." Clapton had heard of him. Wild stage presence. Played with his teeth. Set his guitar on fire. Showmanship. Spectacle. Not what Clapton considered serious musicianship. "He doesn't play blues," Clapton said, not unkindly. Just stating what he believed to be fact. "He plays something else. Rock. Psychedelic stuff. It's impressive, but it's not the real thing." The door opened. Jimi Hendrix walked in. He wasn't expected. He'd heard through someone who'd heard through someone else that Clapton was here, and he'd simply shown up. He wore a military jacket, colorful scarf, his hair a magnificent halo. He carried his white Stratocaster in a worn case. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Just shifted. The way a room does when someone walks in who changes the air pressure. "Jimmy," one of the session players said, standing up quickly. "We didn't know you were." "Just passing through," Hendrix said quietly. His voice was soft. Almost apologetic for interrupting. "Heard there was music happening." Clapton looked up. He wasn't hostile. Just curious. "Jimi Hendrix," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Eric." "I know who you are," Hendrix said, shaking his hand. His grip was gentle. "Everyone knows who you are." There was no challenge in his voice. No edge. Just fact. They talked for a few minutes. Small talk. London weather. Upcoming gigs. The usual musician shorthand. Clapton was polite but slightly dismissive, not out of cruelty, but out of certainty. He'd already categorized Hendrix in his mind, talented showman, not a serious blues player. Someone suggested they play something together. Clapton agreed easily. He was confident. Generous, even. He'd show this American how blues was really played. Not as competition. As education. They sat down. Hendrix opened his guitar case with slow, deliberate movements. The white Stratocaster emerged. He didn't plug it into an amplifier immediately. Just held it. Like greeting an old friend. "What do you want to play?" Clapton asked. "You choose," Hendrix said. Clapton picked a standard 12-bar blues progression. E minor. Simple. The foundation of everything. He started playing. Clean, precise, technically perfect. The notes fell exactly where they should, creating that familiar blues feeling that millions of people loved. He played for maybe 30 seconds. Then stopped and looked at Hendrix expectantly. "Your turn." Hendrix plugged in his guitar. The amplifier hummed softly. He adjusted the volume knob with his thumb. Closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them and looked directly at Clapton. "This is blues?" Clapton said, the question carrying just enough weight to be a challenge. "Not aggressive. Just testing." "The way you play it?" Hendrix smiled. Not a big smile. Just the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. The smile of someone who'd heard this question before and knew the answer didn't require words. "Show me real blues," Clapton said. And this time there was an edge to it. Not mean, but definite. "Prove it." Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Hendrix didn't respond verbally. He just positioned his fingers on the fretboard. His right hand hovered over the strings. And then he played one note. One single note. He held it. Let it sustain. Bent it slightly. Let it breathe. The note filled the room, not loud, but complete. Total. It wasn't showing off. It wasn't proving anything. It was just there. Existing with such profound certainty that the room forgot to breathe. The note lasted maybe 4 seconds. Maybe 5. Time became irrelevant. When it faded, Hendrix played another note. Different. Lower. He let it ring against the memory of the first note. Then a third note. Then silence. Clapton's hands had stopped moving. He was holding his guitar but not playing it. Just listening. Hendrix continued. Not fast. Not showing technical virtuosity. Just playing. Each note arrived when it needed to arrive. Each silence lasted exactly as long as it needed to last. He wasn't following the 12-bar structure Clapton had laid out. He was creating something else entirely, something that contained blues but wasn't limited by it. His fingers moved up the fretboard, found harmonics no one knew were hiding there, made the guitar sound like it was crying, then laughing, then remembering something painful, then accepting it. The session player stopped fidgeting. The room had gone completely still. Clapton was watching Hendrix's hands, his face, trying to understand what was happening. This wasn't blues as he knew it. But it was more blues than anything he'd ever heard. It was the essence of blues, the feeling beneath the structure, the truth beneath the tradition. Hendrix played for maybe 3 minutes. Maybe 4. No one was counting. When he finished, he let the final note fade slowly, then lifted his hand from the strings and the sound died. Complete silence. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding. Clapton sat frozen. His guitar was still in his lap, but he'd forgotten it was there. He was staring at Hendrix like he just witnessed something that wasn't supposed to be possible. One of the session players started to say something, then stopped. There were no words for what had just happened. Hendrix looked at Clapton. That same gentle smile. "That's how I hear it," he said quietly. Not defensive. Not boastful. Just true. Clapton opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. He stopped. Started over. That was. He couldn't finish the sentence. For the first time in his career, maybe the first time in his life, Eric Clapton had no words. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what had just shattered in that room. Eric Clapton had built his entire musical identity on mastery of tradition. He'd learned the rules perfectly. He could play any blues standard note for note as the masters had recorded them. He took pride in his authenticity, his respect for the source material. And in 30 seconds, Jimi Hendrix had shown him that perfect replication wasn't mastery. It was safety. Real blues wasn't about following the structure. It was about understanding why the structure existed in the first place, understanding it so deeply that you could honor it while transcending it. Hendrix hadn't disrespected the blues. He trusted it enough to take it somewhere new. Clapton set his guitar down carefully on the floor. Not in anger. Not in defeat. In something else. Humility. Recognition. The ego he didn't know he had, the one that came from being called God, had just been gently dismantled. "Teach me," Clapton said. His voice was quiet. Honest. "I thought I knew. But I don't. Teach me." Hendrix shook his head slowly. "Can't teach what you already know. You just gotta trust it more than the rules." I've been playing it safe, Clapton said. It wasn't a question. It was a realization spoken out loud. You've been playing it perfect, Hendrix corrected gently. That's different than safe. But, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Perfect is just the beginning, not the destination. One of the session players finally found his voice. Christ, Jimmy! Where did that come from? Same place Eric's came from, Hendrix said. Same place everyone's comes from. You just gotta stop asking permission to feel it. In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. Hendrix stood up and handed his guitar to Clapton. Here. Try again. Don't think about what you should play. Think about what you feel. Clapton took the Stratocaster. It felt different from his guitar, lighter, more responsive. Or maybe he was feeling it differently now. He positioned his fingers on the fretboard. Started to play the same 12-bar structure he'd played before. But this time something was different. He wasn't trying to play it correctly. He was trying to play it honestly. The notes were rougher, less precise. But they meant something. Hendrix nodded slowly. There you go. That's it. It's not as clean, Clapton said. It's not supposed to be clean, Hendrix said. It's supposed to be true. They played together for another hour. Not as competition. As conversation. Hendrix would play something, Clapton would respond. Clapton would play something, Hendrix would build on it. The hierarchy dissolved. The challenge disappeared. What remained was just two musicians discovering that mastery wasn't about domination. It was about opening doors. By the time they finished, the cold room felt different. Warmer. Not from temperature but from what had been shared. As Hendrix was packing his guitar back into its case, Clapton said, I'm going to play differently now. Good, Hendrix said simply. I'm going to have to unlearn some things. You're not unlearning, Hendrix said, clicking the case shut. You're just remembering there was more there all along. Clapton sat for a long time after Hendrix left. The other musicians had filtered out, back to their lives, their sessions, their gigs. But Clapton stayed in that cold room, holding his guitar, thinking about everything he thought he knew. What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. 3 months later, Eric Clapton recorded Sunshine of Your Love with Cream. It was different from anything he'd played before. More primal, less controlled, willing to let emotion override precision. Critics called it his breakthrough. Clapton knew it was his unlearning. He never forgot that afternoon in Soho years later, in interviews. When people asked him about influences, he mentioned the standard names, B.B. King, Robert Johnson, and then he'd pause and add, and Jimmy showed me that respecting the blues meant trusting it enough to let it change. The session musicians who were there that day told the story for the rest of their lives. Each version was slightly different, but the core remained the same. Jimi Hendrix didn't need to destroy Eric Clapton's ego. He just held up a mirror and let Clapton see the cage he'd built for himself. Mastery without mercy. Growth without cruelty. That was Hendrix's gift. Not just how he played, but how he made others want to play deeper. The white Stratocaster stayed in that worn case. But the lesson it delivered that afternoon changed British rock forever. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Eric Clapton played differently after that day. Looser. Braver. Less perfect, more true. When people praised his evolution, he'd smile that same quiet smile Hendrix had shown him. The smile that said, I learned to stop asking permission. 30 years later, Clapton was asked, what's the difference between technical mastery and true artistry? He thought for a long moment. Then said, Jimi Hendrix played one note in a room in Soho and I understood everything I'd been doing wrong. That's the difference. The room above the pub in Soho is gone now. Demolished in 1983. But the silence that followed that single note still echoes. Some sounds never really fade.